Hey everyone, it's Nikachu, and we're back with another modern tier list video. And now we're going to look at all the cards that got unbanned in modern. We're going to rank them based on their playability within modern. I'll talk about the ranks here. First, we got broken. That means this card is so damn good, it deserves to be banned. Then we got like a strong staple. That means not only is it a staple in the format, it is like a really good, impactful card. Can sometimes win the game on its own. Then we got playable staple. Playable staple is like, you see this card around a lot, but it's not exactly the most overwhelming card in the world. It probably didn't even deserve to be banned in the first place. Then we got waiting for a home. Good cards, like legitimately good cards, good strong cards, but they need the right shell for them. Right now, they've got no home. They're homeless, waiting for a home. Then we got garbage, stuff that is unplayable, almost or barely playable in the modern format. That's where the garbage goes. It just makes you wonder what the hell made this card banned in the first place. But before we get going, I'd love to thank my sponsor, FusionGamingOnline.com. Fusion Gaming has a huge inventory for all formats, so no better place to build a deck than at Fusion Gaming Online. Don't forget to use coupon code Nikachu at checkout. It supports the channel and also gets yourself 5% off all your purchases. Let's start it off with Ancestral Vision, basically Ancestral Recall, but you gotta wait a few turns. So Ancestral Vision was actually unbanned in 2016. Now this is a very important time period because it is the maximum that the control players were whining for playable cards. It's like, well, we can't do anything anymore. Oh, we don't got Jace the Mind Sculptor. Our counter spells suck. We don't have any threats. Where's our Planeswalker? So do you know what? Wizards of the Coast? They decided to throw the control players a bone. Let's unban Ancestral Vision. And you know what? It saw play. Good, great card. And I have to admit, I have that sinking feeling when they play this thing on turn 1. And I'm like, oh my god, I gotta beat my opponent within 4 turns. Or they're just gonna draw a bunch of cards and bury me in the card advantage. But still, it was not exactly as broken as it looks. I mean, if you're trying to play it in a fair way without trying to cascade into it, it's a pretty bad top deck late in the game. Modern is still a very serious format. If you top deck this Ancestral Vision, it's like drawing nothing if you have to address something on the battlefield. So the control players no longer needed to carry around buckets to hold their tiers. They could leave them at home. They got a good playable staple. But since then, it's actually been quite pushed out of the format. As we see, the Wizards of the Coast really heard the pleas of the control players. Just fucking dumped millions of great playable control cards, not to mention unbanning Jace the Mind Sculptor, printing really good stuff like Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, Teferi Time Raveler, amongst many other incredibly powerful staples that had to see bannings in the future. Teferi Time Raveler particularly actually makes this card not so well positioned, because if you put it on suspend and your opponent plays a Teferi Time Raveler, well, you actually cannot cast this card when it comes off suspend because you're not allowed to cast things at instant speed. So it actually just gets killed. Same thing goes with Meddling Mage if they name Ancestral Vision. So if you're up against humans and they've got the Mage on Vision, well, then that also kills off your Ancestral Vision. So I actually think this card is really, really strong. It's just getting pushed out by a lot of really other good cards. So I actually think that this card is waiting for a home. If they ban Teferi Time Raveler, I think this is exactly the type of card a lot of control decks are going to go straight back to. Moving on to Bitter Blossom. Now, this is a textbook case of a card that was broken in Standard, but is bullshit in Modern. This card is unplayable. In fact, I named the tier Garbage for a reason, because I was just trying to think, what exactly can I describe Bitter Blossom as? And that it's just garbage. I'm sorry, Fairy players. I know you love the Bitter Blossom. I know there are massive fans for Bitter Blossom, but I'm not here to BS you. Turn 2, do nothing is not what you want to be doing in Modern. Not only are you doing nothing on turn 2, you are losing life every single turn to put irrelevant 1/1 flying creatures onto the battlefield. It would take you 5 turns and 5 life to have 5 power on the battlefield. That's useless. You're dead by then. Bitter Blossom has aged very poorly, like a carton of milk that has been left outside in the heat of summer for like 2 weeks straight. And for that, we know that it has to go to the garbage. Next, we've got Golgari Grave Troll. Now, truth be told, when this card got unbanned, I mean, it didn't even do anything. It was being put in the most janky looking graveyard strategy synergy decks. People were trying to make it work, but weren't really successful to any degree. It was only until they printed Prized Amalgam, oh, we got some gas. So now all of a sudden there's actually a payoff for your blood gas for getting onto the battlefield, your Narcomoebas. You can assemble an army out there. So it wasn't until Dredge got some ammunition in its chambers that it was a lethal threat to the modern format. And Wizards of the Coast has the philosophy, guns kill people, but bullets don't. So anyway, they banned Golgari Grave Troll, although they left like 4 other guns still legal in the modern format. They just dealt with the assault rifle. Next up, Jace the Mind Sculptor, a card that saw so much play in Legacy, and everyone was, absolutely certain Jace the Mind Sculptor is in jail. Wizards of the Coast, they ate the key, swallowed it down, it's gone. I never really understood the criticisms for keeping Jace banned. Modern was always pretty hostile by turn 4. I never clearly could understand how a Jace the Mind Sculptor could survive, especially since its loyalty was so low. Oh, you want to brainstorm? I mean, this is just 3 loyalty. You're just going to get bolted down to death. And the arguments for this was just bizarre. Like, you can't unban Jace the Mind Sculptor unless you unban Bloodbraid Elf. Is Bloodbraid Elf supposed to be Jace's kryptonite or something? Now, don't get me wrong, Jace the Mind Sculptor is super strong, can be played in any blue deck, will definitely win the game on an empty board. I mean, you will just get fate sealed to death, or if the board is balanced, if you're drawing an extra card a turn through Brainstorm, I mean, no one's coming back from that. But Modern is pretty aggressive. I mean, you can die on turn 3. Yeah, nice Jace the Mind Sculptor you've got over there. You're effectively spending 4 mana to Brainstorm. If you're behind, this card is fucked. It's not going to do anything. Spending 4 mana just to fucking Brainstorm is terrible in Modern. In my opinion, this card never belonged on the banned list, but Jace sees consistent play in blue mid-range decks and also blue control decks that it is a very strong staple. But make no mistake, when the board's at parity, Jace is a mirror breaker. And speaking of Stoneblade staples, let's now talk about Stoneforge Mystic. And I swear, even at the time, they unbanned Jace the Mind Sculptor, and now people are like, well, you can never unban Stoneforge Mystic. That's out of the question. Do you remember the Stoneblade era? They're always predicting how good a card will be in Modern based on how good it was in Standard, which is worthless. Too many of these cards got unbanned way too slowly because everyone was terrified about what they're going to do in Modern because they were such a boogeyman in Standard. Do you remember Standard? Do you remember what Bloodbraid Elf did in Standard? Do you remember what Jace the Mind Sculptor did in Standard? Do you remember what Stoneforge Mystic did in Standard? Who cares about Standard? Standard, it's its own environment. Fuck Standard. Stop bringing up Standard it's the worst argument ever. All these cards that came off the ban list, with the exception of Golgari Grave Troll, they're fine. They are completely fine. They're not overpowering or broken or anything because Modern is powerful. It is a super hyper powerful format. Standard is weak garbage. Standard is like when you beat your parents at chess. So you think you're really hot shit until you move to a real chess tournament, we'll consider that Modern, and all of a sudden you get obliterated. The environment matters. And again, people had the arguments like you can't unban Stoneforge Mystic unless you ban Batterskull. People were claiming that, like, come on, let's put Batterskull on the ban list so that we can unban Stoneforge Mystic. I mean, it just goes to show how badly the Magic community evaluates these cards on the ban list. I think they're just grossly overrating them all the time. There's not even any reason for Stoneforge Mystic to be on the ban list. Like, what is it gonna do? There's so many turn 3, turn 4 combo decks. You're dead so quickly. What? Best turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic. Turn 3, put Batterskull in play. Turn 4, attack you for 4 with lifelink. Oh no, the game is over. How am I going to win? But in fact, there's actually so much interaction. In fact, Stoneforge Mystic is significantly worse in Modern than it is in Legacy just because of the mass amount of removal that we have access to in Modern. Not to mention, I mean, the moment they printed Kolaghan's Command, which just like deals 2 damage to a creature and blows up an artifact, you could probably take Stoneforge Mystic off the ban list. But really, any removal spell can badly tempo out a Stoneblade player. I mean, if they play Stoneforge Mystic turn 2, I mean, you have some options. You can kill the Stoneforge Mystic if you want, or if you want to let them have the Batterskull in play, you know what, maybe bait them to do it, because they'll spend another 2 mana to get that Batterskull in play. The Batterskull enters the battlefield, battlefield, and then you just kill the germ token. Then the Stoneblade player needs to pay 3 mana, put Batterskull back in their hand, another 2 mana, get the Batterskull on the battlefield. What have they spent up to this point? 9 mana? 9 mana, and all they have is a 4/4 lifelinker, and also they might be dead by now. Like, I don't know what the turn is, turn 5, turn 6. That's a lot of time. You can't waste that time in Modern. But don't get me wrong, I mean, the card is super playable. There's nothing wrong with having a tutor for various numbers of swords, and Batterskull still a decent threat. You gotta answer the Batterskull. You gotta answer the Stoneforge Mystic. That uses up resources. The games go long, but they're very fair. Stoneforge sees play in the Stoneblade decks, in Death and Taxes, and is a great addition to Modern, and that is why I'm putting it as a strong staple alongside Jace the Mind Sculptor. Look, we got them both hand in hand, and they're not breaking the format, people. Not breaking the format. Who would have thought? All right, moving on to Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. I didn't even know this card was banned, and I had to get unbanned. Now, Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, easily super powerful card. It's been the win condition in Bring to Light Scapeshift decks, Titan Shift, and now is actually seeing a lot of play in any deck that plays Dryad of the Elysian Grove, like Amulet Titan. I mean, even if you don't combo finish with this card, it can obliterate your board. If you have at least 5 other mountains on the battlefield, each mountain that enters the battlefield is a lightning bolt. Even if they couldn't combo off with Scapeshift itself, they could just keep playing lands and shoot off whatever is on the board, buying them tons of time. But historically, there's nothing really oppressive about this card. It was like a really slow late game deck, not even sure how it got banned in the first place. It's probably most abused today with Dryad of the Elysian Grove, which cheats on the mountain requirement because Valakut itself is not an actual mountain. But with Dryad in play, it actually is considered a mountain. So obviously it's like a really strong staple, nothing too aggressive. I mean, when you eat a bunch of Taco Bell, I mean, it doesn't hit you instantly. It will hit you eventually, and when it does, boom, it's everywhere. It's so nasty. Flushing the toilet immediately, using all the air fresheners, using the fan. There's no defense to that, just like how there is no defense for Valakut when someone plays Scapeshift. So moving on to Wild Nacatl. Now, believe it or not, this card somehow warped the Modern metagame to the point where, like, everyone was just playing Zoo. I really can't comprehend what the hell happened there. So they banned it. They banned it for diversity. For diversity's sake, we are banning Wild Nacatl from the metagame. I'm not making this stuff up. I don't understand what Wild Nacatl would have an edge against, especially in an era of Splinter Twin and Affinity and Birthing Pod and Deathrite Shaman that allowed Jund to ramp into like turn 2 Liliana the Veil, turn 3 Bloodbraid Elf. I mean, it was crazy back then. Now, eventually, they did take Wild Nacatl off, and it saw immediate play. Many different variations. Zoo aggro, Zoo mid-range. It even got played in Burn. Naya Burn was actually a very legitimate archetype, but over time, the removal has become plenty. We now have access to Fatal Push, and Blood Chief's Thirst, and On Thin Ice, among things like Ice Vanquaddle that's just going to eat this little guy up. Wild Nacatl might come back in Burn one day, in some very specific metagame, in a very specific sense that Burn already needs some green cards. But you know what? I mean, it's being like that guy who says, oh yeah, I am so good at this game. Oh, but only if we play on this map. Oh, we can only use these weapons. No, let's not play with that armor. That's cheap. Hey guys, can I play with some hacks? So anyway, I actually think this is just pure garbage. I mean, it doesn't see much play today, and if it ever does, it will be incredibly fringe. I don't think it's waiting for shit. I think it should just stay in the dumpster. So next up, Bloodbraid Elf, which is a card that got banned for the sins of Deathrite Shaman. That's right, R&D absolutely loved Deathrite Shaman. The fact that it was so interactive in Modern, not only controlling the graveyard, but also being able to gain life, drain the opponent, and ramp you up. And it was an absolute lethal weapon in the Jund decks. And that is why the Jund boomers are the boomers. There was a period of time in Modern where the metagame was like 75% Jund. If you go turn 1 Deathrite Shaman, turn 2 Liliana the Veil, turn 3 Bloodbraid Elf into Tarmogoyf, I mean, that's gas. You can't ask for more. Or even if you go Bloodbraid Elf into Liliana the Veil, that was also gas. But Wizards didn't want the premier Black-Green X deck to just be Jund. Like, what about the other wedges? What about Abzan? What about Sultai? So given Jund was seeing so much play, they wanted to power down the Jund deck and maybe try to breed a little bit of diversity in the metagame. So what did they do? They banned Bloodbraid Elf. So that would help let people branch out into things like Abzan, which actually happened. Not to mention people actually had a weird mix at the time between Jund, Abzan, and 4-color Jund, which was basically just Jund with a splash of white for Path to Exile and some other cards. But it definitely wasn't the reason Black Green X was so good. And then eventually Wizards banned Deathrite Shaman and left Bloodbraid Elf on the ban list. What the hell was that? Everyone's like, you framed Bloodbraid Elf like years ago, you banned the real offender, and now they're sharing a jail cell together. Bring Bloodbraid Elf back. Eventually they did unban her. And honestly, great card and all that, but really not that OP at all. Never was. Bloodbraid Elf is just a fair magic card, always has been. The best value out of a Bloodbraid Elf is basically Bloodbraid Elf into some relevant creature, but like that's nothing amazing by turn 4. A 3/2 haste creature, nothing scary in Modern, but there are so many blanks that a Bloodbraid Elf can find. I mean, I've seen it between like a 2nd or 3rd Blood Moon, an extra Klothys, Arbor Elf, Utopia Sprawl. In the Jund decks, it can find Inquisition or Thoughtseize late in the game when the opponent has no cards in hand. Lightning Bolt, Fatal Push, Abrupt Decay, Maelstrom Pulse when there's nothing on the board to kill. The Bloodbraid is just good when she's good, but pretty mediocre when she's bad. So still a staple. I would say playable staple. Nothing super OP. Is generally an included card in any deck that can play red or green, but nothing overpowering, and I don't think the format would really miss her even if she got banned again. Lastly, Sword of the Meek. Sword of the Meek was banned because it comboed off with Thopter Foundry, which is an artifact where you can pay a generic, sacrifice a non-token artifact, which would be the Sword of the Meek, goes to the graveyard. You create a 1/1 blue Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and you gain a life. But when the token enters the battlefield, you can return Sword of the Meek from the graveyard to the battlefield. So basically, you can make tokens and gain life equal to the amount of mana you have on the battlefield because you will keep sacrificing the Sword of the Meek over and over and over again to gain that life and to gain the tokens. But what the hell combo is this? You don't win or anything. All you do is make a bunch of flyers. What happened in Magic's history that the format was so weak that 1/1 flyers were so devastating to the metagame, like from Thopter Foundry or Bitter Blossom? I mean, they're trying to hold these things back, but then when they were unbanned, they did nothing. They were basically unplayable. I mean, sure, some people tried to build decks around this, but it was garbage and eventually faded away until the printing of Urza, because now with Urza, you can be able to add a mana every single time Sword of the Meek comes back on the battlefield. So add a mana, then use the Sword of the Meek to be sacrificed. Get the token, sword comes back, add another mana with Urza. It is infinite mana, infinite life, and infinite tokens. Now that is a real combo, but the problem is Urza needs to be well positioned, and after the banning of Mox Opal, of Arkham's Astrolabe, and Oko, Thief of Crowns, we don't actually see Urza in the metagame. So either Urza's waiting for the right card to put itself over the top, or this card is waiting for the right home. And maybe to be fair, Sword of the Meek, Thopter Foundry, and Urza, they're fantastic together, and maybe all of them combined are looking for a new home. Urza was living the life with his Opal, Arkham's Astrolabe, and Oko. But the thing is, he was renting those things. He wasn't making any payments. They got repossessed. So Urza's like, don't worry, kids. I'm gonna go get a job. I'll provide for you. We aren't gonna eat craft dinner every night. So if you'd change anything on this list, let me know in the comments section below. Don't forget to give a like if you love these tier list videos and if you love my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Just click, or Urza will spit in your food.